So thanks guys for joining. This is really supposed to be talking about how do we deploy for GeoTB, but I guess the principles should apply for other TB like Hoth and so on. However, Hoth, for example, we've already sort of as a guild and as a community, pretty much all of us are trying to get maximum stars. But if you're not, and you start a guild, then I guess you can apply the principles. In addition to this, I think it's also thinking about what do we do on a light side. It really depends on the focus that the guild has had on developing some of the characters required for these particular TB battles and special battles and so on. The page that I'm showing you at the moment allows you to have a look at what particular tunes and how much you need to deploy in terms of number of GP for the platoon deployment versus how much you can get for each phase and how much you get out of combats. Please feel free to actually go into the wiki and have a look at what those numbers might look like in order to determine where you can actually gain. If you actually look at the platoon assignments, you need to be deploying in even numbers, so 2, 4, 6. If you don't do that, you might end up missing out on the abilities that you get from the deployments. So you don't deploy in odd numbers, it doesn't actually gain you anything. Therefore, it's really important that you follow that rule. If, for example, you end up miscalculating how to deploy your characters, you may end up actually having an issue in terms of the number of stars that you can get. For example, if I decided to go for trying to achieve 3 at the top instead of 3 stars at the bottom and preloading the top instead of the bottom, you may actually come up with a calculation where overall, in terms of the amount of GP you get, it's 15 stars for the same amount of GP rather than 17 stars. So I've done my calculation and I just want to talk you through the potential and possibilities of how you can actually get the maximum number based on a GP of 135 active, 335 million active GP. So after we go through this, imagine reenacting the scenario where you deploy preload the top instead of the bottom, and then you do the bottom in 3 stars, but in phase 2 you're finalizing the top and you're preloading, you're finishing off the preload at the bottom to maximum. You preload the top, you do the bottom at 3 stars, then you finalize the top, and then you go into zone 2, which is the bottom of zone 2 where you're preloading to 1 star. Then in phase 3, do the example where you do the top ships to 2 stars because your ships won't be open, and that's, I think, one of the issues, that you're actually not actively able to do ships already from phase 2. And then you get bottom at 3 stars where you had preloaded, and then you've basically not really utilizing sort of the middle. And then by phase 4 you're going for the bottom zone for 2 and your ships for 2 stars. In effect, you end up with a lot less stars. So thinking about that scenario, that only gives you 15 instead of 17. So I'm going to try and talk to you how to do it later. Try to maximize on deploying your platoons, especially in the middle, in the beginning quadrants, because what you can see is that it actually has an effect on the other zones. So it affects 6 zones if you deploy your platoon from zone 1. If you go for Republic Resolve zone 1, which is the bottom, you affect the middle and the bottom quadrant as well, and that's also going to be needed. So as you progress through, make sure that as you get into the areas, even if you're preloading, you're actually loading up your platoons, and that's helping you with the combats that you will do in those zones once you get there. As you go through the different types of areas, like you can see, some of them you may end up not filling at all because it doesn't actually pay off to fill them, and you end up losing out because you're concentrating tunes you may have actually used on fights. So if, for example, you look at zone 2, Zone 2 platoon, you should actually fill the platoon before you hit the combats, and therefore you should hold all combats and deployments until such time as you've actually loaded the platoons. So you can do that on Echo Base. You can, and I mean through your commands in game, is hold it and make sure that you send out commands and information notification to your guildies when they have been filled, and communicate that through Discord. Your ship platoons and some of the other platoons, for example, that are, you know, from zone 3 onwards, if you're a smaller guild, you're unlikely to actually need those, because you're not going to be going into zone 4. So I would say don't do that. Always make sure that you're planning your path, so wherever you're going, you're actually making sure that you're filling in the zones where you'll require those abilities to do maximum damage. For example, if you're going to be hitting the bottom, you need to make sure before you hit the bottom in ATT Zone 3 that you have actually filled the platoons before you hit the combat there as well. So that's fine. If we actually then go back to my Excel spreadsheet, and we can have a look at sort of what is the scenario that we want to come up with. So in the Excel spreadsheet, the scenario that we have right here is that for each star, you actually have a number of GP that you need to fill in. So for example, to get 1 star is 65 million, for 2 is 84, for 3 stars 109 million GP. So if you've got a guild that's 135 million, you probably can get those 3 stars and then potentially fill in preload for the bottom at 36 million, which will allow you to kind of get your 3 stars in preload and then move into the next quadrant. And in the next phase, then you're able to, you know, gain the additional stars that you're looking for your GP. Now, this is a rough guide. We're saying the active GP, if there's more, then you probably get more. So if we look at a scenario where phase 1, so we're trying to get 3 stars, and we're going to get 3 stars for that phase, and in the bottom, we're only going to be preloading to 1 star, that we don't actually hit the 1 star. You have to just be under, make sure that you close everything. Sometimes you have to go like a few million beforehand, and then when you go a few million beforehand, that allows you to actually do some of the special missions if you want to get an early start on special missions. That ends up allowing you to do 2 times in a row special missions, one after the other. So whatever bonuses you can get in there, there's more potential for that as well. Great, so that's sort of for phase 1. Going back, having a look at filling the platoons for zone 1 in phase 1, that actually gives you 2 quadrants where you get your abilities, which overlaps with the top zones platoon assignment. So actually you're in much better state when you're hitting those in phase 2 to get those particular abilities. You know, you've got your Galactic Republic having 25 critical avoidance, and you've also got summoning that rocket, that droid that's going to be able to help you execute. So that sort of helps you with being able to do a lot more damage. That droid's pretty good, and it will actually be with you for the remainder of those phases once you fill it in the top quadrant. So when we talk about phase 2, we now have the ability for phase 2 to then you know, have a look at trying to go as far as we can on the ships. I doubt that with, you know, with the 60 million, let's say 66 million active GP on ships, you'll probably get around 2 stars. You now have the ability to hit that bottom quadrant as well, but we want to fill in the platoons on those ships, because when you fill the platoons, it will actually help you in zone 3, the 2 quadrants in zone 3, that will be able to give you a lot more power in terms of giving you additional speed there. And separatist allies, they recover 5% health and then equalize health with other separatist effects. So if you're going in with GG, you're going in with Geos, it's very good to fill in those platoons. We then concentrate on trying to finish off in phase 2 our preloaded bottom quadrant. So we're going to get 3 stars over there, and then we're going to start preloading the middle, and we're going to get 1 star in the middle preloaded, because you just won't be able to reach the GP to get more than that. So we've now hitting sort of 3, 6, 8 stars by this point. So we're talking about 104 million that you need there, but it's only effectively 60 million because you need to do the gap, and then your middle needs another 60 million. But what we'll do is we're going to preload that 60 million, so that will give us sort of close to that point where we need to. And if you want to at this point, you can also start filling in the platoons for the bottom in zone 2 if you want to, and that will help you sort of with your next missions anyway, so for phase 3. So in phase 3 we are then having a look at where we're going from phase 3. We're now going to have to attack sort of the middle. You're progressing on your ships. The bottom is really important. Your middle, if you filled your platoons, then will help you in the middle quadrant in zone 3. So we want to make sure that those platoons have been already filled in, which is great because it's likely that we're going to be hitting the middle zone in zone 3. And then if we, like I said before, if you go for combats in the bottom, you need to make sure that you fill the platoons before you do that. So here we're looking at the top in terms of fleet being around 92. In the next zone, we are also looking at the middle there, which is 190 to reach the full middle combat. So it's unlikely that we'll get the full. So we're going to go for 2 stars over there, and then we'll start preloading at the bottom to try and get close to 1 star as we can, because the bottom at 1 star is around 42, and that sort of gives us that percentage that we're looking for the active GP. Okay, and then obviously we said that we'll be going for the ships, and the ships we're going to try and get around 2 stars there. Okay, so that's sort of for phase 3 where we are sitting at to maximize on our GP. So in total, we're looking at 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 at this stage, with 1 star preloaded at the bottom. So that's close to 13 stars. Right, so the question is, what do we do from here? And for phase 4, basically, we're now at the last stage. We're not filling any platoons for the ships at the top because it only affects the next quadrant, which is zone 4, which we're never even going to go into because we're not going to be able to make it with that level of GP anyway. So we're going to leave that out. We've got quite a bit of help from each zone in terms of what are the abilities, and therefore I think the middle quadrant there is looking quite appetizing. At the same time, if we hit the bottom and we've preloaded, we also have some of that. These don't really matter. If we're going to go for the bottom, we have to definitely fill in ATT 3 zone 3, because then we've got extra abilities there in order to do that. There's no point in filling zone 3 middle because we're not going to go to zone 4 as we said, so we'll just leave that one out, and you can put ignore on the echo based commands for that. Okay, so what you get is you get quite a big massive damage target enemy and another random enemy deal physical damage to all. I think that's a great sort of buff to get, so make sure that you close off those combats and deployments until such time as you've filled that quadrant. So going back, what we're going to do is we're going to try and attack that middle so that we can try to get to that maximum if we can, and then we're going to go to the bottom and try and potentially see how far we can possibly take it with the bottom in this last phase, and so on. I mean, the other potential thing is any additional stars. So if you want to go for 18 stars, that might also be possible, because you might be going for the ships in the top in zone 4 at 54. You're most likely going to get that as well if everyone deploys and so on. So actually Actually, I'm thinking you probably get a lot more stars than that at this stage. So if you think about what's possible, it might change based on how people play and their activity and how sort of active they are. You're hoping that they'd be hitting, here we've got something that's 109 million and 60 million. That's together, that's 169 million. It's more than your active GP, but again, you're gaining a lot from the battles, and you've got a lot of assist on those battles in terms of abilities, and you might very well be able to get 2 stars. There's many ways you could play it. You get 2 stars in the middle, you get 1 star at the bottom, or you can get 1 star in the middle and then 2 stars at the bottom. But it sort of depends. You need to try it out and see what works for you, and then make that happen as you go. You might want to play things differently. So I definitely guaranteed through this you should be able to get 17 stars. You may get more. Like I said, you could probably get that extra ship star at the top, which most likely you will, sitting at 18, 19 stars. Dockside GeoTB is not a bad outcome after all. If you've got any questions, please do ask and send them through our way, and we're happy to answer anything that you might have. I think the important thing now is to make sure that you actually have the relevant characters in terms of platoon in order to be able to assign some of the stuff, and make sure that it's actually working, and that for your guild, and that the people have farmed it, and maybe give people instructions to farm certain characters that they might not necessarily have currently in their roster, but that will help. Let's say one character can actually ruin the whole platoon assignment, so it's important to make sure that you're covering them, and you're getting a maximum benefit. I mean, to ask one guy to farm a single character for the sake of the whole TB and guild, I think it's totally worth it, and you should do that.
So just continuing from our previous example, we want to see how we can actually make changes to Echo Base in order to get our platoon assignments off to our guildies. And so you would have gone into actually Genosian Republic Offensive on the selection, and then I'm going into phase 1 to have a look at what platoons I've got there. And we're trying to achieve in these 2 first zones maximum 6 stars value. And here Echo Base is able to actually show you what characters you'll need to deploy in order to get it. You need to, as remembered, think about whether you want to actually delay filling in the platoon or ensuring that you deploy the platoon, whether you want to do the whole mission or only part of it. If you want to, click on submit. You then see that you've got AA members, you've got a number of mentions there. You get private messages through to your members, and they're told in public also what they have to do, and also we publish to the channel the commands, so each member actually knows exactly what they're supposed to do, and so on. We can actually schedule when they receive that notification. You can do strategy in here, but you need to actually be a patron, and it's a great tool. So I would suggest becoming a patron and paying. Otherwise, you've got only a couple of attempts to be able to do it. As we said in some of our phases, we are going to be preloading and so on. So all of this will help you get the instructions out early. In terms of the next sheet, basically see that you can define how many are rare tunes. So if you've got in a guild, let's say less than 3, then obviously that's something worth considering and flagging up when you're looking at that, because you might have to pick which platoons to deploy to and which not, and that's sometimes challenging. You then can also define rare units, and you can define specific assignments for rare units. Units you're able to then select from a drop-down list. There are options there, everything is listed there. You just click on the ones that you need to include, but we're not going to do that now. And creating assignments for rare units, we're also not going to look at that. I haven't gone into everyone's rosters for this guild, so I can't tell you exactly what needs to happen. In terms of what you do on the assignment layout, you basically put messages. You want it in the public space. You also want to be able to show any shortages so that the guild is aware of where you've got shortages on specific characters, etc., or tunes that need to be loaded. Also, there's 3 algorithms for assigning, and we'll look at that now. And make sure, of course, that you consider where the guild does act in terms of, if they've got all the tunes, or whether it's likely that they won't, etc. And make sure that you obviously are deploying an even number of platoons, because if you don't, as I said before, it's just not going to count. You also want to assign units that are level 80 or less, obviously, and assign units that are G9. You can change that if you want to. That's up to you. But for example, if a player is going to be using one tune instead of another, and they're part of one team, you actually want the assigner to be assigning all of those deployments to that person, because you don't want to end up having broken teams all over, and then people can't actually do combat, so you're affecting multiple users. So it's important to make sure that that's set up correctly in Echo Base before you even come to this point. We have a video that explains that. So right, we've ticked the even number of platoons only, and we're also going to make sure that it's level 80. But if the guild is like a bigger guild and everybody's got 85 level tunes for pretty much everything, then that's not going to make much difference. And then G9, you can make it G10, G11, it's up to you, based on where you're at from a guild perspective. If you feel like you can afford to have it higher, then go for it. And once we're done with that, we click submit, and there we can see all the ticks. That means that all the characters are fine except for this one, where the guild has 4 and is required as 1. So it's sort of flagging up, as we said, that for that 3 difference there. So on that preview, we showed it. We've now sent the message, and if we go to Discord, we should be able to see those messages displayed for everybody in the guild, successfully sent through. So everyone's going to get a private message with that, but also in the Echo bot channel, you actually get per platoon assignment, everyone mentioned, and where, and the fact that you're filling in all the platoons for that particular top quadrant that we went into for Zone 1. Anybody who we ignored from the list earlier on, or we didn't want to include, we kind of ignored those players, or where there were no assignments because the bot couldn't find assignments, it also flagged those guildies, and they could help fill the assignments if, for example, someone else missed out on the actions at the top, and therefore we can fill those platoons much faster. So going back to our platoon assigner now, just remember that we're able to go into the next phase now and have a look at what's available in the next position. So zone 1, bottom quadrant, we see a different picture here. We see that some are scarce. So for example, we require 4, but the guild has 7. So let's say, more than one quadrant needs this platoon assignment. If you don't have enough, you may not actually make it. So you've got to be careful about how you can fill these, and you might, for example, if you preload, be able to fill in the remainder few in the next time you go in. So for the next phase, before you actually hit that 1 star. So just make sure that you do that. Let's do the same thing as we did before and actually go in to try and schedule a submit there. And we should get the assignment for the second one as well, and we'll show you that it's for the bottom zone in Zone 1, and it calls them out. So we didn't cover sort of what's on the different algorithms there for the assignment. You can do it on the guildies which are the weakest, but then it's not fun for them because they won't be trying any battles. So it's important to sort of think about those guys. Here you go. Here is the second assignment instructions that have gone through. The second sort of algorithm option is, for example, to you know, not just the weakest players, but actually assign it random. So if everyone's sort of at the same you know, same GP and so on, you might want to do that. And the default option is the one that I actually prefer, because it kind of shows you sort of the weaker tunes, because you probably won't be using them for a particular battle. So I prefer to use that one. Look, you go through each phase. So let's look at phase 3 now. And phase 3 obviously shows you everything there, and there's some highlights. So for example, one of our bounty hunters is sort of on the low, so you can see with the red flag there, you've only got 3, but you actually need 4 to fill all the platoons. So therefore now we have to start making choices. Luckily in the zone, you know, we are not going to be using the missions in the middle, because they actually give us boost in zone 4, which we're not going to go into. So we're really sort of concentrating on that bottom. So we want to fill in the bottom platoons. So for the middle platoons, you know, we're not going to be utilizing that, so we can actually go ahead and switch that off. And we have to go through all those characters and just make sure that there isn't anything else that sort of may affect us. But once you switch it off, then things should change, and you should get the updated numbers without a problem. So let's say we're ignoring this particular mission. There it goes all, and all the reds on the right have now disappeared. The numbers are now looking fine for both Sith Marauder and for our bounty there. So we're all good to go on that one. And again, for ships, I think it's about sort of thinking about which ones we might want to end up filling in. We might choose to only fill in 4 or 2 of them, but I wouldn't worry too much if we're in phase 3 and we're going to zone 4, because we won't really be going to zone 4, so it doesn't really matter. You can even ignore those if you wanted to. Pretty straightforward. If there's sort of any questions, please feel free to sort of let us know on Facebook, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. But it's pretty much as easy as that. You go through each phase and just make sure everything is fine, and you're not loading. If you're loading platoons up front, you shouldn't really have any problems, because they won't influence the next platoon. But if you're loading your platoons from the 2 zones at the same time, you might end up getting into a situation where you can't load your platoons for the next zone. So do try and preload your platoons up front so you don't have any problems, and then finish off your platoons where you have been preloading in the next phase as it churns over, because you'll have a chance to do that before you hit the combats. Make sure you hit the combats after you load your platoons, especially in areas where it affects them, and I think you'll be good to go. Good luck with your TB, guys, and always here to support you. SEAL Team Siths, come to the Sith Temple for more information. Thank you, and see you soon. Bye.